Alright guys, so I've got a review of another WM watch here. This is the second one I've checked out on the channel. This is WM175. If you haven't seen the one I previously reviewed, that's this one down here. And if you want to check that out, I'll leave a link to that up in the top and also down in the description as well. But getting back to this one, so this is everything you're going to get. This is the main box. So it all comes in there. Got the WM watch branding. And then you'll also get a link removal tool in the box as well. And then we have this nice little watch roll, which has actually got the watch in it. So you can actually use this whilst travelling with other watches as well, which is handy, not just a useless box. And then if we open it up, we've got the watch in there. And here it is. So it's a really good looking piece, I think. Obviously it's an homage of a Grand Seiko, but at a fraction of the price. But the question is it any good? It's definitely unusual for a few different reasons, which I'll get into as we get into this review. Some really odd choices they've made. But before we get into all that, first of all let's go over the dimensions. So we've got a diameter of 44mm, thickness of 11.8, lug width of 22, then the all-important lug to lug is coming in at 47mm, but we have actually got male end links on this. However, they do drop down pretty quickly, as you can see. So the effective end link to end link measurement is more like 52mm, but it does wear better than that would suggest, which I will show you later on obviously. So seeing as we're around here, let's talk about the head of the watch in a bit more detail. So you can see we've got that signed crown there with that WM logo. We've got a mainly brushed case, but we've got some nice polished details. So we've got a polished chamfer around the whole of the edge. And then we've also got those polished tops of the lugs as well. And you can see more clearly now as well, that male end link. Would have been nice if it had been female, but it is what it is. I really don't like the way it sticks out with the bracelet past the case there though. I would have preferred if they just had it just dropping down underneath. It just doesn't look great the way they've done it. When it comes to that bezel, you can see we've got some nice polished details on there as well. And you can also see as well, we've got that perfectly flat crystal. We'll be checking in a bit if that is sapphire. And it does actually dip down slightly below that bezel. But now let's talk about the dial in a bit more detail. So you can get it with this black dial that I've got, or you can also get it with the blue one. But I think the blue one still has a black bezel though. So we've got applied indices, which are nicely done, and then we've also got an applied logo as well, which is actually pretty good looking. Definitely better than the previous branding they had. I always say that I prefer brands to have just the logo on the dial. You don't need the brand name, just have the logo. It's a cleaner overall look. And when it comes to the date, we've got that date window at the 4 o'clock. Definitely not my preferred position for it. I'd prefer it either at 3 or ideally at 6. And especially with this dial configuration, I just don't think it quite works. Replacing those circular indexes with a square date window just looks a bit odd, especially when you could have had it on, as I say, the 3 or the 6. It would have fitted in better. But other than that, I think it works pretty well, and it's a pretty nicely laid out dial. And the only other thing we've got on there is the automatic 200 meter water resistance, but we'll come back to that a bit later on. As for the hands, they're really nicely done, got a brushed finish on them. Nice proportions on all of them as well, and we've got a lot of surface area there as well to get Lume on, so we'll be checking out the Lume in a bit. Before we do that though, let's get onto the bracelet and talk about that in a bit more detail, because there is some interesting stuff going on here. Some good, some bad. So we've already discussed the end links, so we'll get onto the main part of the bracelet. So it's a mixture of brushed and polished. It is nicely finished, and then we've got push pins on there, but this is where the issue comes in. For some reason we have a butterfly clasp, and not only that, we also don't have any half links, so sizing is going to be a bit of an issue. I'm not really a fan of butterfly clasps at the best of times, but on a dive watch, it just seems like a really odd choice. When it comes to the case back, we've got a display case back, and we can see that movement in there. That is the Miyota 8215, which we'll talk about in a bit more detail in a bit. And then we've got the usual kind of specs around the outside, so automatic movement, stainless steel, and again it's reiterating that 200 meter water resistance. So now let's move on to the bezel and talk about that in a bit more detail. So it's 120 click and it's ceramic. Nice clicky action. Not really any back play. And when it comes to the alignment, on mine, it is ever so slightly off unfortunately. So I've got it positioned where it is actually in line at the moment, but if I move it so it's actually clicked in place, it's ever so slightly behind or ahead depending on which notch I'm on. Which isn't ideal. A little bit of a shame, but obviously that will vary depending on your watch. It's not miles off, so it's not a deal breaker. But now let's check the crystals on both the back and the front and see whether we've got sapphire or not. using the trusty diamond selector thing. And unfortunately we've only got mineral on this. So this is a little bit odd. Again, this is something that in the listing it says it's got sapphire. Quickly check the back though. And yeah, that is mineral, but you kind of expect that. But as I say, on the listing on both AliExpress and the website, it says it's got sapphire crystal. So I'm not sure if they've updated it since they sent me this watch, or if this is a different version that I'm not finding somewhere. Or maybe they've just made a mistake in the listing. I'm not really sure which it is. So if anyone else has got one of these, please do let me know if yours has got sapphire crystal or not. But now let's get onto the movement. So again, as I said earlier, there's something a little bit odd with this. So it says it's got 200 meter water resistance, but when it comes to the crown, that is only a push-pull crown. So it's definitely not 200 meter water resistance. So we've popped out to the first position there. Now we can change the date. And as I said earlier, this is the Miyota A215. So if we pull it out to the second position, you can see we have actually got hacking. So it's the newer version of the A215, which actually hacks, because the previous one didn't. So it is good they've used the improved version. And then if we pop it back in, second hand will re-engage, and then we can just hand wind it. But it is a little bit awkward to do with the shape of the case, with those lugs there. You kind of hit your finger, well your thumb on the bottom. It's not the hardest, but it's a little bit awkward. So it all works well enough, but I would have personally just preferred an NH35 myself. But let me know, which movement do you prefer of the two? But now it's time to check out what the Lume's like, see if they're making the most of that surface area, and if we've got some good Lume on here. So you can see we've got a bit already, but let's charge it up and give it a proper chance. And there we go. So you can see we've got that nice green glow with C3. This is another thing that apparently is different on the listing though, from what I've got. According to the listing, it should have C3 and BGW9, so the hands should be BGW9. But you can clearly see they are green on the one I have. Yeah, they might be a slightly different shade of green to the indices, but that might be pushing it a bit. I'm personally just seeing it all as basically C3. So again, I'm not sure if this is something they've changed, or if this is a slightly different variation of the watch I have. Or again, maybe they've made some kind of mistake in the listing. Again, if you do have one of these, let me know on that as well. So in terms of the Lume we've got, initially at least, it's looking pretty good. There's no patchiness, and we've got pretty consistent, apart from the colour difference slightly, between the hands and the indices, and also that Lume pip. We have also got a bit of Lume on that counterbalance on the second hand, but personally I always think it's a bit weird when you Lume a counterbalance. But I guess it at least lets you know the watch is still working. But anyway, as always, the question is, what is the Lume longevity like? So let's speed this up now and find out. So initially, it's not looking too bad, but you will start to see gradually that the hands are ever so slightly quicker when it comes to the fade in between them and the indices. Not a huge amount, but it is noticeable. Perhaps if there is a version that has BGW9 on them, that might last longer, but obviously I can't comment on that. But we've got no patchiness, and overall, it's okay Lume, just not great. So I'm sure by now you can see what I was on about at the start of the video, that they've made some really odd design choices with this watch. Some of which are minor ones, some of which I think are probably going to be deal breakers for a lot of people. It almost feels like they're stuck between trying to do a proper dive watch or a more dressier style diver, and they've kind of got stuck somewhere in the middle. But that being said, if you got this far into the video, you probably want to know what it's like on wrist before you finally make up your mind. So we'll do that now, and also go over all the pros and cons, and whether the positives outweigh the negatives. And then I'll tell you whether I recommend this watch or not. And here it is on my 7-inch wrist. So I do think it looks good, and as I said earlier, it does actually wear smaller than you think given those dimensions on the case. And also that actual male end link extending that effective lug to lug. It still wears nicely because it does drop down pretty quickly. And it does actually conform to wrist quite nicely. If you've got a smaller than 7-inch wrist though, this probably won't be for you. But if like me you do have a 7-inch wrist, you still might not want to get this for one reason in particular though, and that is that butterfly clasp. So at the moment I've got it where it's a touch too big for me. I would have liked it slightly tighter, but if I remove another link, it's actually slightly too tight. So I have to wear it slightly looser than I'd like, otherwise it's just not really wearable. And this is why I just don't really like butterfly clasps. And I still don't understand why they put it on this style watch. It's a dive watch. Give us a normal proper clasp with some micro adjust. Don't be putting a butterfly one on there. I'm not a fan of butterfly clasps on dress watches at the best of times, so I definitely don't want on a diver. And speaking of this being a dive watch, is it really a dive watch? It's definitely not 200 metre water resistance, which they're claiming, because we've only got a push-pull crown. Yeah, we've got a screw-down case back, but with a push-pull crown, you're probably going to get maximum 100 metre water resistance, definitely not 200. So again, it just feels like a confused watch more than anything. They couldn't decide what they wanted it to be. That, combined with the inconsistencies between the listing and what I actually have, in terms of it being advertised as sapphire and this having mineral. Also, the two-tone Lume should be C3 and BGW9. I've only got C3, and the Lume I do have isn't the best. So overall, I just think they missed the mark with this watch. But perhaps, as I said earlier in the review a couple of times, perhaps this is an older version I have. Maybe they have already fixed some of these issues, including that sapphire, and they've changed up the Lume maybe, which is definitely a step in the right direction, but it still doesn't fix the main issue with this watch for me, and that is that butterfly clasp. For me, it's just not really usable, not really wearable because of that. I just can't get the perfect fit, which is a shame because it is a good looking watch. If they just fixed that and tweaked those other little things, I would recommend it, but as it is at the moment, I can't. So if you're still here at the end of the video, thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you in the next one.